Are there any ministerial statements? I call the Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, last night's federal budget delivered on much-needed cost-of-living relief for Queensland families, including a $4.7 billion package to deliver cheaper childcare for more than 1.2 million families across the country, a $530 million boost to paid parental leave, increasing by 6 weeks to 6 months from 2026, free TAFE places with 180,000 starting next year and 20,000 more university places, and a historic investment in housing with the National Housing Accord to target 1 million homes across the nation. The $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund has been locked in and initials $350 million for another 10,000 affordable homes. The National Housing Accord will be backed by our government's $2 billion Housing Investment Fund. Importantly, there is another $200 million for remote Indigenous housing. Mr Speaker, Q Shelter have said, and I quote, "Both the federal and state governments had listened to the many voices of people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness." Mr Speaker, the budget backs good Queensland jobs, jobs where there is renewable energy, manufacturing, medical manufacturing, agriculture, critical minerals and a $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. There's another $204 million to protect our iconic Great Barrier Reef and regional projects, including a Townsville hydrogen hub, nearly $72 million, a North Queensland simulation park in Townsville to support the defence industry, $32 million, support for the Lansdowne Eco-Industrial Precinct, $22 million, the Cairns Marine Precinct and CQU CBD Cairns Campus, $200 million, a new Services Australia Cairns Smart Centre with 100 staff, and $600 million for Paradise Dam. There's $2.1 billion in new transport infrastructure, more than $1.4 billion for New South Wales. Let me just say that again. There's $2.1 billion in new transport infrastructure, more than $1.4 billion for New South Wales, including $866.4 million in Bruce Highway upgrades, $400 million for the inland freight route, $400 million for beef corridors, $210 million for the Coranda Range Road upgrade. Mr Speaker, I am disappointed that there are delays to some transport projects.
Order.
And I will absolutely be discussing this with the federal government. That's right.
Order. Members to my right. The debate on that budget will happen in another chamber and not this chamber. I call the Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Despite these delays, there's more funding for Queensland over
Sorry,
the
Premier. Member for Logan, you're warned under standing orders. You have the call, Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the budget delivers $2.5 billion to fix Australia's aged care system, taking pressure off our hospitals, Mr Speaker. There's $235 million for urgent care clinics to reduce the pressure on our emergency departments. Funding to improve primary care in rural and regional Australia, Mr Speaker. Another $375 million is committed to fund half of the Queensland Cancer Centre, Mr Speaker, and the extension of the COVID-19 response funding until the end of the year and other adjustments means an extra $1 billion in health funding to Queensland than under the Morrison government, Mr Speaker. $1 billion. Mr Speaker, $1 billion more. $1 billion.
Order.
$1 billion.
Order. Member for Pine Rivers. Members to my left will cease their interjections or I will start naming members. Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There's more work to do at National Cabinet when it comes to funding the health system, but the Albanese budget delivers more for Queensland's hospital and primary care. And I'll continue to advocate for 50-50 funding for public hospitals and listing the 6.5% cap on federal funding on activity. Mr Speaker, I expect more to come for Queensland in future budgets. The budget flags future funding for the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games, and we are just starting detailed discussions on funding support for the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan. The Prime Minister has been very positive in the discussions I've had with him on building new pumped hydro energy storage dams. Queensland will benefit from the $20 billion Rewiring the Nation Fund and $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. We welcome those funds, Mr Speaker. We are continuing to work on funding partnerships to connect Townsville to the Northwest Minerals Province and to progress the Hewenden Irrigation Scheme and support the proponent. All of these projects will mean more investment in Queensland's regions and good jobs. I will always put Queensland first, Mr Speaker, and make sure that future funding stays in our regions. The federal budget sets out a pathway to navigate through the challenged global conditions and waves of inflation that lay ahead of us. There is welcome cost of living relief for Queensland families and support for more good jobs in emerging industries. We have always advocated for more funding for Queensland, and we won't stop now. Mr Speaker, since 2011... I'm happy to talk about the budget later, during question time. Ask away, Mr Speaker, ask away. A very stark contrast between Morrison and Albanese, let me say that.
Order! Member for Southern Downs. Member for Southern Downs will cease his interjections. There is no benefit in yelling louder than anyone else to be heard. Premier, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, since 2011, our state has faced 100 natural disasters which have come with a collective damage bill in excess of $20 billion. We know that this summer the Weather Bureau is predicting an increased threat of flooding and an increased and early threat of tropical cyclones as we experience a third La Nina season in a row. We can never be too ready into the future. Mr Speaker, I want to thank every single fire officer, SES worker, rural firefighter, marine rescue crew member and QPS member who go above and beyond to keep our communities safe. I pay tribute to their efforts each and every year when they walk toward danger to ensure our safety. Mr Speaker, today our government will announce key and historic reforms that will deliver improved and streamlined emergency services for a much safer Queensland. The Minister for Fire and Emergency Services will in a moment provide comprehensive detail of what these key reforms will involve, but they are part of our government's determined effort to make sure Queensland is in the best position to respond to ongoing and more intense natural disaster events and in the best position to respond to these impacts. The changes to be announced today follow an independent review of the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, which has presented a raft of recommendations, all of which we accept in principle. To achieve that, our government will commit more than $400 million over the next 4 years, investing in almost 500 additional frontline personnel and delivering better frontline services for all Queensland. And, Mr Speaker, this is in stark contrast to the former LNP government that cut services right across the state. Mr Speaker, the restructure of the and the Minister will outline this in a moment. Mr Speaker, given the fact that we are the state most exposed to natural disasters, it's imperative that we are prepared. What my government is doing today is ensuring that. Mr Speaker, last Thursday, October 19, Queensland set another first, the first state or territory to celebrate War Widows Day, an annual celebration to honour and recognise the incredible work of our widows, war widows and widowers. Those dedicated Queenslanders who provide crucial ongoing support and care to those who lost loved ones defending our country, who made us all safe and secure. Queensland has the biggest veterans population with 163,000, and we must ensure that their futures are secure as well. And that's just what War Widows Queensland do, providing services, care and support for those left behind. We chose October 19 in recognition of Jessie Vasey, who was born on that day. Jessie set up the first War Widows Guild 75 years ago, and it grew into what's now the War Widows Australia. To mark this occasion, I hosted a lunch in her honour with members of War Widows Queensland. I want to thank my Assistant Minister. I also want to thank Minister for Education for attending as well. City landmarks...
Order. Member for Kawana.
Yes, and I acknowledged you on the day as well.
Order, members.
It was a good day.
Members to my right.
It was a good day. City landmarks like the Story Bridge and Parliament House were lit up in blue and white, the War Widows colours, and we have moved to ensure Jessie's legacy will never be forgotten. The government is providing $10,000 so the State Library can set up an oral history of Jessie's work. And it was lovely to be joined with members of her family on that day as well. It will be posted on the library website and at the Anzac Square Memorial Galleries. It will also be included in the library school curriculum, a fitting, lasting tribute to Jessie Vasey. War Widows Queensland is among 203 organisations that receive funding from our Anzac Day Trust programs. They deserve and need our support and recognition, It's why we should mark War Widows' Day each and